Hello, and welcome to Archives and Records Simplified. These videos are aimed at people looking for basic knowledge about archives and records management, although at times I will also touch slightly on information and library science. These videos are designed to provide bite-sized chunks, which means that almost every video will be less than 15 minutes. These videos are honestly for everyone, and comments and suggestions are always more than welcome. About me, Sean McMillan, I'm an archivist based in London, and you can learn more about me via my LinkedIn profile, to which there is a link posted below. And I'll also post a transcript and notes also if you struggle at any point to understand my accent. And lastly, if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could kindly like, subscribe and share. Thanks again. Okay, so this video is about working with non-archivists or other non-information professionals. Okay, so a quick overview of what this video is about. So, in my experience, working with other archivists tends to be the exception and not the norm. If you work in an academic library, for example, you may find yourself working a lot with librarians and possibly conservators, depending on the size of the institution. And it's not uncommon to work with records managers, IT specialists, and people maybe even involved with finance, depending on the task. The archive sector tends to intersect several others, and it is often the case that the archivist will be a relative outsider in the industry that they find themselves in. So, for example, you may find yourself working for a corporation whose specialty is shipping, or a charity whose specialty is animals, and what you do as an archivist supports them in that goal, but your actual work as an archivist is maybe separate from other people in the organisation. In fact, it's quite often that that's the case. Either way, in these situations, you may find yourself in need to forge good relationships with people from other backgrounds, and doing so may often be essential to your work, and that's certainly been the case in my experience. Okay, so the first thing I would say that's really important, and I would say can be quite critical, is debunking common misconceptions and myths about archival work. Now, I should say that this list is far from exhaustive. There'll be many people with many experiences and who have experienced many other misconceptions, but these are a few common ones that I think are worth keeping an eye out for. So the first thing I would say is that archivists are not historians or librarians. There are similarities, but our work is quite distinct. This is a mistake that I think is more common in the corporate setting and maybe less so in academic libraries where people have specific job titles. And it's worth noting that even some job descriptions will advertise for a librarian when really they're looking for an archivist or records manager, and vice versa. Sometimes organisations will advertise for an archivist or an information manager when essentially they're really looking for a librarian. So it's worth being very clear about what an archivist does and how that can differ from people in other professions. Another thing worth making clear is that archival work is dynamic and ongoing. So sometimes I think our profession can be misunderstood as being a bit passive or simply watching over old records like a babysitter. But archival work is, or at least should be, quite active. You should be consistently looking at new ways to engage with users, enhance the quality of your descriptions, track what's going on in the sector, encourage new collections if that's part of your job. And these are ongoing tasks, and especially with tasks such as digital preservation, these tasks are not just done once and that's them done. They need to be updated, you need to keep an eye on them as they go, and there is ongoing work to do. And I think that can be quite important to stress, maybe in settings if you have a line manager or an organisation that doesn't have a lot of knowledge about archival work, and they perhaps think that a series of tasks can be done once and then that's it. So that's another thing I think is worth keeping an eye out for. It's also worth noting that our method of cataloguing is quite unique. Archival catalogues, unlike library ones, tend to be hierarchical, and what I would say is that context tends to matter more to archivists than other information professionals, and it can be used to emphasise this. This might be relevant if you're working with IT staff who are helping you put a catalogue online and you want to keep the order of the catalogue as structured as possible. That's something that you really want to think about. And lastly, it's important to note that archivists have their own standards and schemas, such as ISAG and NCA rules. These are unique to archival work and really can't be substituted with MARC or anything else. Some places may ask you to record certain metadata specific to them, and this is absolutely fine, but I would recommend using the pre-existing standards where you can. or at the very least, a really good place to start. Okay, so I think a critical aspect to working with people from other backgrounds is good communication skills, and there's a few helpful tips here which I think you might find useful and have certainly worked for me. The first of which is to try focus on common goals. In my experience, although you may find yourself working with people from other backgrounds, the organisational goals and aims should be the same. So, for example, if you're an archivist within an academic library and you're perhaps working with an engagement officer to promote a collection, you may both have your own ideas and priorities, but the end goal should really be the same, and that would be the promotion of the collection and encouraging access. So I would tend to try to think about this first and foremost and maybe work your way back from that. And also try and knowing the organisation as much as possible. And this means understanding the culture, the people, the customers, the users, and the management, etc. Understanding these details can help you communicate better with others and also work better with others from other backgrounds. You may have different experiences and responsibilities, but you will have a commonality in the people that you're trying to serve or the people you're trying to help. The second piece of advice relates heavily to communication skills. I know these are often mentioned in job descriptions and other places, but they really, really do matter. I recommend listening as well as possible, reading emails properly, and communicating as well as you can. I know this will all sound quite basic, but I can't emphasize it enough. I think it helps to also be concise where possible and to try and make your input as simple as you can. For example, if you're writing an email that is starting to go beyond 2 or 3 paragraphs, I would really start to consider if this is really necessary. Just general point, as I said, I know that will probably seem really, really basic, but you'd be surprised at how many people I think maybe forget how good communication skills can be. Another piece of advice I would say is to try avoid complex jargon where possible. Some terms can have specific meanings to archivists that are not obvious to others, such as funds, or series level, or provenance, which might have a very distinct meaning in archives that it means to other people. This can be particularly relevant when working in digital preservation, where terms such as file or library can have different connotations, and I recommend being clear on terms where possible. I think that can be really helpful. I also think that sometimes compromise can be inevitable. Sometimes if you're working on a project with others from other backgrounds, you can all have your own priorities and goals, and sometimes you may need to make trade-offs. For example, when it comes to packaging and conservation, it can get very expensive and time consuming, and there may be times when you can only aim for the best possible option. For this, I would recommend organising your priorities and working up from the most basic to the sort of Rolls Royce option. So set your most important and your most valuable goals in an order and sort of work down from there and compromise where you can. And lastly, I think it can also be a great opportunity to learn about something else or pick up new skills and knowledge. In the last year, I've undertaken a few courses relating to technology, which has helped me a lot. And I previously did a short course about organising exhibitions, which helped me realise how much time and effort can go into those kind of things, and the sort of things someone in that position would have to think about that I might not have thought about as an archivist. So just generally speaking, I do think it helps to try broaden your knowledge and to try have a more holistic view of your work. And it can also be an opportunity to learn something as well. Okay, so a very, very quick case study. A few years ago, I catalogued a collection of musical instruments with the help of a musical expert. He knew a lot about instruments and music, but not so much about archival standards. And of course, I knew a lot about archival standards, but not so much about musical instruments. Although we had different backgrounds, we did have a common target. We needed to catalogue this collection of instruments to a certain standard within a certain time frame, and this shared deadline helped us focus during the project. So we used this deadline as something to work back from. That was a shared goal, and everything worked to support this deadline. So that's the line in the sand that we drew, and we worked back from there. We communicated well. I listened very carefully to him and him to me. I think it helped that both of our personalities seemed like a good match. We seemed to get on quite well there, which always helps. And I think it also helped that we had a shared understanding that there were no stupid questions, and it's absolutely okay to ask for clarity. This is something I would always emphasize if you're ever working with someone that's new to a topic. There really are no such thing as stupid questions. Something that might seem very obvious to you might not do to someone else, and I think it's always helpful to ask questions where you're unsure and to make people feel that they're allowed to ask questions. We made compromises as well. So, for example, when collecting metadata, we use metadata based in ISAG, but not the more specific fields that I would normally like to record, such as language of materials, which were not really relevant here, and we didn't really have time to collect that type of metadata. And we compromised in terms of how much information we recorded about the instruments. So, for example, we did record other details that were specific to musical instruments that were critical to managing them. That was an area where we had to compromise and where I think it worked well for the project. And also, it was great for me to learn about musical instruments, and I was able to do some reading them on time. He recommended a really, really good book, which helped me enhance my knowledge. So overall, this project went really well and we met our deadline. I think the key lesson here was embracing an open culture and being able to consider other viewpoints. And if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could like, subscribe and share. And also just to remind you that I would be absolutely delighted to take any requests for future videos also.